Today on CloudShell, let's get a little dirty with the command line. I've been teaching cloud security for something like 15 years now, and there is nothing I fear more than walking into a classroom, staring at a sea of personal work and laptops, and knowing I need to figure out how to get every one of them to run an SSH terminal so we can use our class scripts and commands. Do you possibly understand the nightmare of figuring out how to make an SSH connection on like a Windows corporate laptop? I have some scars. And if you recall our prior use of Session Manager from like a whole bunch of previous labs, we now have a great way to connect instances using the web console without ever needing to touch our local terminal program. This has been a huge help, especially in those in-person classes. While we've made those connections to learn skills like managing credentials, we haven't really used the AWS command line itself very much. Nearly all of our work has been using the graphic user interface that is the AWS console, and we refer to this as ClickOps because we're going clicky-clicky. We've also used a ton of infrastructure as code with our CloudFormation, and that's closer to how you want to manage your applications and infrastructure stacks in a real environment. As you mature your cloud skills, you'll also find yourself using the AWS command line more. Personally, I actually don't use it a ton. I weirdly tend to swap around between the console, infrastructure as code, and Python scripts for most of my work. When I automate, I use Python, but there's still a lot of you out there that automate more with Bash or even PowerShell, and those are both things that the AWS CLI will support, command line interface. Using the command line and understanding the security implications is a really valuable skill that I probably should have included earlier in this training. But, hey, better late than never, and it isn't like most of you are paying for this. That's my plug for CloudShell Pro. Okay, so one option is to use Session Manager and connect to an instance and run the command lines from that instance. And we've actually used that a few times, but it still requires running an instance to connect to. And sometimes we just want to use some AWS command lines to manage our account, and we don't necessarily want or need a persistent image or a persistent instance running in our environment. And this is where AWS CloudShell comes into play. CloudShell is a terminal shell that runs right in the console. It's similar to what we were doing with Session Manager, except instead of connecting to an instance, it just gives you a terminal shell right in the console. Now, I didn't know what it was under the hood until I started working on these labs, and as you'll see later, it's pretty clear that it's a container. But when you launch it, AWS creates a compute environment for you, connects a gig of persistent storage, and pre-authenticates you using the credentials that you're logged into the console with. Just click that little icon, and I'll show you where that is in the console, and your shell will open right up. That environment includes the latest version of the AWS CLI, options for Bash or PowerShell, a gig of storage, and actually encrypts that storage with KMS and backs it up for you. Okay, so what about credentials? And that's kind of our focus today. Those are going to be loaded up similar to how an instance gets an IAM role, and we're going to dig into the details of that during the lab. Those credentials also work within the normal AWS credential precedence order. Now, what's that? We haven't really talked about it. Well, it's something I also probably should have covered earlier, but hey, I've been throwing a lot at you. Whenever you run a tool like the AWS command line or one of the SDKs like Bodo, the Python SDK that we used in some recent labs, it's going to pull those credentials or look for those credentials in a priority order, unless the programmer like hard codes in a location that they want you to use. And by the way, if you get an app and it tells you have to only put it in one place, try not to use that app because that means it wasn't like coded well. Direct credentials can be submitted on the command line or in the code itself as parameters. We're not going to do that today, but that would be literally going -- AWS access key and secret access key. You can also set them as environment variables, and we are going to look at those a little bit today. You can store them in a credentials file, and the credentials file is located in your home directory at a directory location called .aws, and that's for mature operating systems. Now, for those of you on Windows, it's in the registry %user pro. I don't know. Go read the blog post for where it is. Windows. Ugh. The next thing is if it's not in the credentials file, it'll look in a config file, which is in the same locations. And then it'll look for container or instance profile credentials or the CloudShell credentials we're going to use today. And so when you issue an API call using the command line, it's just going to check each one of those spots until it hits a set of credentials that it can use. And it stops on the first set it finds. Now, you can get around that by using something known as a profile, which is a named profile. We used that a little bit in some previous labs, and it's going to use the first set that matches the name, the defined profile. Or otherwise, you can do some like stuff at code level to point to a specific location. But for the most part, it's just going to go through that order. It's going to go look for what's in the command line, takes precedence over what's in an environment variable, takes precedence over the config credentials file, over the config file, and so on and so forth. Now, CloudShell itself is great because it never saves your credentials. They're actually not in your shell, and they aren't stored where all the nasty malware tends to look for them. And even if you store other credentials yourself in CloudShell, they're encrypted. And CloudShell, it's not like an instance somebody can crack into via SSH. It's a lockdown container that's only accessible through the console. So it's pretty cool. It's a browser-based shell. And so unlike your computer, some adversary can't pop a shell with malware and then start using your credentials while you're sleeping. You would actually have to have an open console session, and they would have to click right in the web browser themselves. Now, I am going to show you how to extract those credentials, though. And for those of you in an enterprise environment, you can restrict CloudShell to a VPC itself. So that means it's going to be constrained by any of your network security controls. So the attacker couldn't, for example, just go out and download whatever they want. But it also provides you access to your service endpoints, including private link. This can be really good for doing a fair bit of testing. Now, before we get into the lab, a few notes. As you're going to see, the command line interface, it's pretty straightforward to use. And there's a link to the reference in the blog post. You type in AWS, then the service name, then dash, and all the various request parameters. I'm going to show you it in a second. You can even override the persona or your identity by adding in different credentials on that command line itself, or telling it to use a particular profile, or telling it to use a particular region. And we're going to use all of that today. Here is an example for the command line for just running a generic instance. Now, all the IDs and everything there are fake, but it's just AWS EC2 run dash instances, so the service and then the command. Those backslashes are just to do new lines to make it a little bit easier to read, and you see it's dash and all the request parameters that you would use, same as if you were doing it in code. And behind the scenes, it's basically the same as the API call that the console is making for you. Now, I have some general rules of thumbs for how I personally use all the various options for kind of getting into the command line and doing things within AWS. And if I'm trying new things or I'm trying to quickly set something up, I'm almost always going to start in the console. Now, that's unusual for a lot of people who've got my level of experience, but the visual nature helps me wire the process in my head. And when I'm looking around, it'll expose me maybe to settings and features and stuff that it's hard to look at when you're just looking straight at a code definition or a command line definition. Now, sometimes I'm going to use the command line instead, and I use that typically for checking like really quick results of commands, things that the console may hide or tuck away in a corner, or if I want to like look for something really quick and I want to have a better sense of like what does it look like at the API level. And for that, the command line interface is also really awesome for troubleshooting. I've had situations where I've gone in where I'm like, is this image or this instance hidden, or is it just something with the console? And that's where the command line can help me. Now, if I need to create something repeatable or for managing the production version of something, I'm always going to be using infrastructure as code, CloudFormation, or Terraform. So that's going to do the building part of things. And for any automation beyond that, I use Python, as you've seen, and we use a lot of Python here. Now, some people automate using the command line interface and Bash. I use Python. Although occasionally I'll even embed some of the CLI commands into my Python. There's a specific example around how you clean out S3 buckets. The command line interface automates a bunch of it, where with Python, I have to go through much more slowly. And so it just kind of speeds up that process. And then if I am wanting to play with some command line tools and I don't want to like install something locally, I can also use CloudShell. You can log into CloudShell, you can install many versions of kind of basic command line based software, including Python, and you can run those tools within CloudShell itself. So it's a great way to actually test out software without me having to install that locally on my Mac and deal with Homebrew and everything else, assuming you know what that is. So look, CloudShell is great. It's easy, it's secure, it's a wonderful gateway drug to getting out of the console, start getting you into the command line. It's really nice to have that available. So with that, let's go ahead and jump in the lab. We're going to play with both the command line and with CloudShell today. Now, I've been wanting to do a lab on CloudShell and the CLI for a while. It just took me a little bit to figure out like how to wrap my head around the educational and the security aspects of it. But I think I cracked the code. That's what we're going to do today. So we're going to launch CloudShell. We're going to start in our management account. I'm actually going to show you how to assume a role into another account using the organization account access role. We're going to learn how to use some of the command line commands. We're actually going to generate a file, download a file, then we'll play a little bit with the CloudShell logs. If you see me bouncing around a little bit more than normal today, that's just because I have the whole lab kind of scripted out, but because we're not just going, we're actually throwing a whole bunch of different pieces together. So you might see pauses as I'm moving my mouse and copying and pasting some stuff. This is one where you absolutely want to be using the blog post with the lab because you're going to want to copy and paste these command lines as opposed to trying to read them off the screen. Okay, with that, let's start in our sign-in portal. And we are going to need the account ID for your test account 1. It's been a while since we used that because we were mucking around in the production account, but that test account 1 has the pieces that we need in it. After that, we're just going to go right into CloudSLA, our management account, with administrator access. Now, CloudShell has been hiding in plain sight the whole time. It's just this button up here. And this appears on every page throughout the console. So you can kind of launch CloudShell whenever you want. And let's go ahead and launch it. Now, yours is probably going to look a little bit different because it is going to change based on if you've launched it for the first time. I obviously did some testing and such. And so that's why mine appears there. And let's also go ahead and make sure we're in the correct region. This is not a huge deal for what we're doing today, but it will work a little bit better if you're in Oregon. Notice when I change the region there, it changes the region there. And this time it's creating a new runtime environment. Now, what's interesting about this is actually still connected to my persistent storage, but CloudShell is going to be different across all of the different regions. All right, so I'm logged into CloudShell, and a little bit later, I'll show you how to make it full screen. But for now, let's just run a command and let's see what our identity looks like. So that's the command line. AWS, we're asking the STS service, get caller identity. That's actually an interesting one because I use that as a threat detector. This is going to tell me my user ID. Don't worry about that, but that AROA means I'm logged in as a role. RMogul is the username, and you can see the ARN. And the important part here is, it doesn't zoom in real well, but AWS reserved SSO administrator access. That's, if you recall, that's the role that was created for administrative access when we did our AWS SSO. Okay, so that's the basics. We now know who we are. Now that we know who we are, the first time I use CloudShell, the first thing I try to do is, hey, let's just pull down the environment variable so I can see what my access key is. So I'm going to go ahead and paste that in there to pull my access key. And there is nothing. I got no results, not an error message or anything. So I'm going to use the command env, which is going to show me all of my environment variables. And let's see what we have here. So I'm going to scroll up and look at these various environment variables. It tells me I'm in a bash shell. You could actually change that to PowerShell. I'm not going to play with that because, oh my God, no, not PowerShell. But this is interesting. This is how I figured out, we're in a container because it tells me the container credentials, and it even gives me the path to those credentials. So if this looks familiar, this looks just like the metadata service, but it's doing it on localhost. It's not actually going to 169.254.169.254. And I guess it's 1338 because I don't know, that's got to be better than 1337 for you hackers out there. I really do wonder if that was part of how they named it. All right, so this is my first hint about where to get my credentials. And I can scroll down, you can see some other things. It's at the execution environment for CloudShell. You can see PowerShell updates off. We're not using PowerShell. Host name. So there's a lot of interesting information in here that if you want to, you can kind of go through yourself. A lot of defaults and stuff for working with the command line and some bash stuff. Okay, so now I know that I'm using some sort of a metadata service. Where do I pull it from? And let me go ahead and I'm going to copy paste those command lines and you'll see how that bit works. So this uses version 2 of the metadata service. So the first thing we need to do is get our token. This is going to lock our credentials and everything to this container, which is running somewhere in AWS's architecture. So I copied out that command from the blog post. So token equals, and this is setting the token and it's saving it as a file called token. Now I'm going to need to get my next command line, which is what's going to actually pull my credentials out. So I put the credentials in there. So it's curl, it's that local host, 127.0.0.1, latest metadata containers. And then as a reminder, you have to put this header in, which includes your token. That's how version 2 of the instance metadata service works. Boom, there we go. So now I get my access keys. And what's interesting is if you know the structure of access keys, ASIA is basically the one you get when you are logged in using the AWS console. So even though CloudShell, AWS tries to hide the credentials that it's using, I can tell now that this is using the access key and the secret key that are associated with my login with my use of the shell. So I think that was pretty cool. I went through that very quickly. It took me a little longer to, and actually some help you can go see in the blog post where I got the reference from. It turns out I pointed the person to the reference, but that's how we go through, and you can actually see what those credentials are. By the way, you don't need these for anything. This was just for fun. We're never going to use these credentials because, as you'll see, we're going to use other ways of getting other temporary credentials that we need for different actions or for doing our assume role. And that does take us to, let's go ahead and assume a role. I'm going to go copy the command line over, and actually, if you go into the blog post, let me go get this. So I went over to the blog post and I pulled this out. And this is basically the string of command lines that we're just going to paste into the console. And that's a cool part of the process. First thing is we're going to set our account ID, and I want that to be to your, test account 1. So that's the account ID for my test account 1. This, by the way, is just a bash script. There's no Python or anything here. Then we're going to set the credentials, and the credentials are assuming the role of the organization account access role in that account ID. So this is just doing our cross account access. We've done this a bunch already, and it's giving a session name saying it's CloudShell and it's using the org access. You could actually make that name anything you want, but I think that's a good one. Remember, session names appear in logs, which really helps you track things. Then we're going to extract and export the temporary credentials. So here we actually do need to pull out the access key, the secret key, and the security token based on that assume role. And so that we're able to use those as part of our active session. And that's all about, and we've done this before, if you remember, we're just setting these now as environment variables. And so remember this order of precedence. It's going to look on the command line first. We're not setting anything on the command line. Then it's going to look into the environment variables. And if it has those credentials, it will use those credentials. It will not use the metadata service credentials. So this is how within this session, we're able to actually do our assume role. All right. And then it's going to just validate, uses that get caller identity to visually validate what we want. I'm going to copy this entire command line, copy, click back into my browser window. And here's an interesting thing. So this is going to look differently depending on what your browser. If you're just using Chrome, it'll work right away. But as you're going to see, when I hit enter here, it's not going to work for me. So I'm going to hit enter. Oh, it did work for me. Okay. Previously in my browser, it made me pop up a different browser window. And you can do that at any time. So this button here will open the entire CloudShell in a dedicated tab. And I'm going to close that. And you'll notice it's my whole session state, my command history, and everything is there. So scrolling down, let me, now I can make the text a little bit bigger. And you can see that caller identity, I'm now using my organization account access role, and I've gone cross account. So I'm no longer in my current account, because if I click here, that's 2353, and instead I'm in this account 6692. So within CloudShell, I've now assumed a role into the other account, and it will be within the same region. Okay. Let me pause and go ahead and I'll get our next command line. I can't remember exactly what we have running in this account. I could start bouncing around looking in the services, but I do know we have a CloudFormation templates that we've been using a lot. So let's just go AWS. So here's the command line. AWS, use the command line tool. CloudFormation is the service, and then describe stacks is the command, and we're not using any parameters. So we're just doing a basic describe stacks API call. And if I hit it there, it looks like I have no results. That's interesting. I thought I was going to have results. All right, well, let's try this in a different region then. So I'm going to go describe stacks, and then now I'll go -- region US East 1 and see if we get results. And this time we do get results. So this is cool. I have not changed my region, but I'm just using the command line to override my current region. And this tells it, go make the API call in US East. And for US East, I have a couple of these. It's my security auto remediation role that we deployed whenever, my event forwarder, stuff that we've done before that we previously deployed. So that's a good way to kind of bounce around regions. By the way, this is something I do use CloudShell for when I'm in one region and I need to check something in another region, or I'll do an assume role to see if something deployed into another account. Instead of opening up another browser, if you know the command line, you just open CloudShell, do your assume role, pop over to that other account, just have that as a copy and paste. I have it on I have one of those copy paste things that keeps, I used a text expander for that. And then it'll pop up into that other account, and then I can see if everything deployed the way I wanted to. And then I close the session and I pop back to my main account. Nice, easy, simple, pretty good. Okay, so for the next thing now, we're going to learn about working with files. One of the problems is like I've run into, for example, in my training classes, all people run tools, it'll generate results, save those out as files, but it's really hard to get those files out of AWS. Well, let's jump back in and let's take a look here. So I'm going to just hit Q. That Q is because otherwise, let me show you again that piece of it. Otherwise, I've got to go down all the lines and give me everything. So I could do that, but let's do Q to get out of it. It doesn't show Q on the screen, but just hit Q. And then the next thing I'm going to do is run the command to get account authorization details. So that's telling the IAM service, get account authorization details. But instead of giving it to me as JSON like this on the screen, I'm saying save it as this file called auth-details.json. In this case, I'm going to copy that file name because I am going to need that. Let me hit enter. And this takes some moment to run because it's actually pulling down all the users and the roles and everything else in this particular account. So cool. So I have that as a file. And if I go ls, I can see that file, auth-details.json. Well, what if I want to download that file? This is a cool feature. This just makes life easy. Go to actions and go download file. Then you just got to type in the file path. In this case, we're in this directory. I haven't put it anywhere else. I'm going to go and download it. And preparing download, it's going to pop over. That's already downloaded. Let me pause. I'm going to get it and show you what it looks like. And as you can see, this is a big file. There's a lot here, but right at the top, it says I have no users. I have no groups in this account. Cool. I have roles. And yep, I have a lot of roles with a lot of things going on in this account. So let me, with all the permissions associated for every one of those roles. And some of these roles are in permissions. Let me see if I can find one of the breaks here. Yeah, so you can see that there's all the service roles and stuff that we've got set up or listed. So there's a lot in there. Okay, so there is one last bit I want to do. Let me go grab that. Now from here, leave your shell open, but go back to this console, close that shell down, and let's go to CloudTrail. Let's see if I have it open. And remember, we are in our main account here, but you can go in here, look in your event history, and you can actually see the creation, the deleting of the sessions, the session sending heartbeats, credential management. So all of that is pretty cool. If I switch roles or switch regions to East, let's see if we see anything here. And it looks a little bit different, but it is largely going to be the same. At some point, you can get account authorization details. And let me go ahead and let's do that line again here, because remember, we're logged into a different account. This is our management account. The shell that we're currently connected to is a different account. So it's AWS STS, get account authorization details. And oops, I got it wrong. Oh, get caller identity. Duh. That's what I want to get. caller identity. Now, this is going to be logged within CloudTrail. And there's kind of a cool trick if you want to actually look at CloudTrail within your CloudShell. And let me go ahead. I'm going to paste in another little script here, multi-line. And so this is actually running already, and this is pulling for recent events every minute. So I said, while true, do, and so that means it goes infinitely. Make the AWS CloudTrail call, look up events, and it's going to look up for events from 2 minutes ago. And then about every minute, it's going to pop over. And because there is a delay in CloudTrail, it's going to take a minute for something to come in. So I'm going to pause the video until I get a result, and we'll be able to see that API call. Or you know what? I'm going to stop it as soon as I get any API call as a result. Okay, CloudTrail sped up enough. As you see here, I had to actually run the command line and try it again to get the events. So I am just waiting for those to feed through. Okay, and I'm realizing I made a mistake here because get caller identity happens in US East and we are in US West. Well, anyway, I'm just going to run it again. You guys can play for it. So sorry I didn't actually get to show you that. It was taking like too long. I don't have enough going on in that account to pull any of those commands. Because remember, this is the account we assumed our role into. We're looking at that activity. But go ahead and play with this. Actually exit out, look at the CloudTrail activity in your current account. It's a lot of really interesting stuff. But the key principles today I hope you got is CloudShell can be very, very useful. It means that you don't need to install a lot of the command line stuff on your own system unless you want to obviously run custom code and everything else that you have. But it keeps all those credentials within AWS and it keeps it all under SSO and other MFA, which I really appreciate. So it's nice and it's secure. And then now you also have a better sense of how to use the command line itself. And maybe we'll see that in some future labs. Have a great week.